Nigel, thank you so much for taking the time to join me and Faiz on this particular show. I want to take you back to a very specific setting.
Steve came back. Take him
Exactly,
back.
yeah. We got to take him back to a very
I'm already
specific
worried.
occasion.
The way he's looking at me, taking me back.
No, don't
Usually
worry.
when people say that, they move to a couple of specific things. I'm waiting for the question.
No, don't worry.
no,
It's not
much
too
better
long
than
ago. It's probably just a few months ago. So we're going back a few months. We're going to St. James's Park at the tail end of last season, where Arsenal arrived with a glimmer of hope at that point still of making it to the top four. But what we saw in that game was almost like a capitulation from the Gunners. Completely got broken down. Callum Wilson ran absolutely riot on the pitch. And they came off that game losing to Newcastle, and the top four hopes were virtually over. Now, as an Arsenal man through and through, how did you feel at that point? Do you remember?
I remember it. I was commentating on it. I remember it all right. Yeah, I think you are right. I think when you look at that game, you saw where Arsenal had recovered from at the start of the season. I remember doing the Watford away game, and I thought if Arsenal won the Watford away game, they would finish fourth, because they'd put themselves in such a strong situation. Newcastle was, if you like, yeah, they're wilted under the pressure. Newcastle executed the game plan to perfection, and Arsenal couldn't adapt to the situation. It was such a limp performance. It was so disappointing from where they'd been. They'd got themselves into a great position, and then all of a sudden it looks like it's just going to break down at the final moment again. So for me, it was a huge disappointment in terms of where Arsenal had recovered from, and then all of a sudden it looked like, oh, we're not going back the same way, are we?
After that game, we saw an infamous presser from Granit Xhaka. He went on and rant about his teammates being not ready for the challenge. What worried you more at that time? The fact that they couldn't fight, or their mental strength? What worried you more?
Football is all about a mental strength. Every player that plays in the Premier League is technically good enough. We can all have our debates on who's better than who, but technically these players are good. But Arsene Wenger used to say to me, the top ones, it's up here. When you get a bit of adversity, those guys rise above it. They find a way to come away with a result. It doesn't always happen, but usually you can dig yourself out of a hole, if you like. So if you're losing, you can get a draw, or somehow you get a victory, you know. Or if you're drawing right at the end, you can pull something out of the bag to get a victory. The big players turn it around. It doesn't always happen, because we don't all win every single game. But yeah, it's, for me, being at the very top, seeing the top players is all about up here. It's all about the mental strength and how you can convince the players around you that actually what you're doing at the moment isn't good enough, but we have to adapt, and we've got to try something else within the game to try and sort out. With Xhaka, I didn't have a problem with that. Some people hated it, saying because you shouldn't be criticising teammates. Yeah. If you need to be criticised within the dressing room, and you can't take your teammate criticising you, then you shouldn't be there, because we used to fall out all the time. Sometimes it become to, you know, pushing and shoving, a little bit handbags, as we used to call it. You know, it wasn't anything serious, but it got a bit heated. Yeah. But then 5 minutes later, we shake hands, say, okay,
it's done. Yeah.
it's gone. We now got to move on to the next game. But if that drives me to become a better player within that game to get a result, I don't mind that.
We remember how dire the situation was and how bleak the general atmosphere felt at that point in time after the defeat. Now, we want to bring you back to the present day, and you juxtapose the emotions from that day at St. James's Park to the emotions that fans are feeling at the moment after the first two games in the Premier League. And there couldn't be a bigger contrast. There's so much more positivity. The team looks completely revitalized. The performances are, 180 degrees turn. There's obviously a lot of factors to this, a lot of different factors. A number of players have come in. But what would be the single biggest factor, do you think?
Well, I'd like to go back a little bit further and say the first 3 games of last season, where the supporters were then, because I'm around them, I'm working with them, I know what it was like. That was almost like Arteta out.
Disaster.
A disaster. And now you've got the complete reversal. And it's all about belief, it's all about desire, it's all about who you brought in. I actually think that Zinchenko and Jesus coming to the club is a massive lift, because those guys are used to winning at Manchester City. They are not, if there's anything about them, they are not going to accept defeat. That lifts the level of training, that lifts the level of performance out on the pitch. And you look at the quality of those players in training, and then you will be saying, that's where I've got to be. If I'm not there yet, that's where I've got to get to, because this team is going to go forward, it's going to get stronger. And if you want to be on board, as I call it, then you've got to be up there with them, because if you don't, if you're not up there with them, you probably find yourself in a year's time, you're out the door and you're playing for a lesser team.
We are talking about transfers all the time, new players all the time. And obviously you mentioned just now Zinchenko and Jesus. We have already seen the impact and the potential impact that they will have on Arsenal this season. If you're in a team, then a world-class player come in, apart from the skills that they brought with themselves, what are the other things that will change towards the betterment?
Well, I've talked about it already. I think usually what you find when you talk about top players is their mentality, their belief, their ability to want to become better than they already are. I think you're seeing, like, if you look at Jesus, it already is what I call is infectious on the pitch in terms of his energy. He wants to, like, so at the weekend everybody's talking about his first goal. To me, I love the second goal, because I've been watching him in pre-season, and his desire to put himself in the right position to score a goal, even if it's from close range, is incredible. And if that doesn't inspire you to want to get to that level or be at that level, or your whole team being at that level, then you simply shouldn't be there. And I think just alone in watching the way that those 2 guys have played so far for the first team, and it's only a couple of games, but I think they become infectious, and I think they lift the quality. When you lift the quality, you get better performances.
The second goal is instinctive, huh? Yeah,
exactly.
Very, very
but that's about anticipating where you think the ball will finish to score a simple goal. It's not a simple goal. It's not a simple goal if you don't move, because you're miles away from scoring it. But because he's a striker and he's thinking near post corner, flick on, where's the space, far post, simple goal.
One of the lines, I would say, of phrases that has become very popular amongst Arsenal fans, and it's a constant source of debate even here in Malaysia, is the term "trust the process." It's obviously been attributed to Mikel Arteta. It's been attributed to Arsenal. Now, like me and Faiz, or me and some other Arsenal fans, we can have all the debates we want about whether you should trust the process or whether you should not trust the process. But Nigel, you're an Arsenal man. What exactly is the process? What exactly was the process?
I don't know. I don't know what you mean by trust the process. I've heard it. What is trusting the process? I can only imagine. So how do I, when you say to me, trust the process, what do I see? A team that's developing, a manager that is moving on the players that he believes isn't good enough. Have been there too long, they're too settled, they're too comfortable.
And do you see that happening very actively at Arsenal?
That's happened. This season, why am I excited about this season, is because this is the first season that this is Mikel Arteta's team. So now we can judge. We can trust the process. But it's all about, for me, it's all about quality of the team, energy. He's brought in the players he wants. Saliba's come back. You know, so this is his team this season, and now we've got to see what's going to happen. I know what you're saying with trust the process is. They're saying it's a building block, basically. That's what it is. We're here in the building block, but we need to be here, and probably they're halfway up it at the moment, and they need to strive to get back to the top. Because what are you aiming to do? You're aiming to challenge last season's two best teams by far, that we think maybe will be this season's best of teams, Manchester City and Liverpool. Are Arsenal there yet? No, they're not. But if they can become more consistent, they can get closer. And if one of those teams doesn't perform as well as they can over the season, then other teams will be looking to try and get into that mix a little bit closer.
Exactly. I want to move away from the term trust the process a little bit. And this is one of the process, the product of the process. So you have played with some of the great captains during your playing career, right? And they say leadership is a must in order for you to become a proper competitive football club, right? And earlier this season, Arsenal has appointed a 23-year-old Norwegian, Martin Odegaard, as their captain. And I think yesterday or 2 days ago, they appointed the vice captain, which was Granit Xhaka and Gabriel Jesus. Do you have confidence in this young man from Norway, to lead such a big club, one of the biggest in England?
Well, what I would say is that I'm pleased we've got a captain, because we had a group. We had a group of captains. Although one was wearing the armband, for me, it always seemed to be about there was a group of captains, which I hated. But in saying that, listen, when I played, Tony Adams was a captain, you know, and people will say, what a leader, what a warrior. But he was a great player. That's the most important thing. Did I ever look to Tony out on the pitch for words of wisdom? No. Because when you go out onto the pitch, the 11 that start are all captains. So if within the game you need to think that you need to ask, I don't know, let's just say we're getting overrun in midfield, so we want to bring certain players inside more to fill the midfield. If I see that, I've got to be brave enough and not wait for the manager or the captain. I'm going to do that, and then you worry about after, or you don't even worry, but after you can discuss why you did it with the manager or whatever. So for me, I'm not worried about who is captain. A captain is, for me, is more off the pitch and around the dressing room. It's a figurehead between, if you like, the manager and the players. So maybe I'm old school. I'm a little different because I know certain people still talk about, but you've got to look to that guy for leadership, and I can understand that. But a leader doesn't have to be vocal. Sometimes you can lead by example. Listen, they've made Odegaard captain. You know, potentially a lot of people will talk about Tierney, but he's got his fitness issues. Listen, I'm pleased that I think we're going to close the book on the debate. Hopefully, because hopefully Odegaard's playing at a high level, so there won't be any debates. But I'm pleased that we've got a captain rather than a group of captains.
I want to touch a little bit on another big character in Arsenal. A lot of the discourse around the rebuild can sometimes be centered on Mikel Arteta. But there's another very key individual that's playing a part in it, and someone who's previously played for the club, Edu. He's obviously behind the scenes. He's obviously doing a lot of the football director's work. And I was recently reading an in-depth interview with Edu where he spoke about taking over from Sven in the past, and how, you know, going to the board, asking them to get Unai Emery out of his role was one of the first difficult decisions he had to make. And it feels that working hand in hand with Arteta, he is also playing such a fundamental part in this rebuild. Nigel, you must know him a lot better than we do. What is Edu like? We know what Edu was like as a player, but what is Edu like as a football operator? Well,
actually, I don't know him that well because I haven't had access to him because of through the COVID for the 2.5 years really. But I agree. It looks like a role where he's making decisions. Obviously, players coming in. I'd like to think that those players being brought in are also what Mikel Arteta wants. Obviously, he can then go and evaluate that player. You can do all the research you want, look at all the stats that you want to. But I think you're never quite sure until that player comes and starts playing for you whether he's going to be a success. But it looks like he's got a big role to play in the club, because obviously Unai Emery went, Mikel Arteta came in, and then I think we just saw in the documentary, did you see the clip with the board and all the players on? And it was quite obvious on one side was the players that they wanted to try and get out very, very quickly. It was so obvious, so that was fascinating for me. But it looks like, you know, the process is starting to move forward. Yeah. But listen, I think it's quite common now, isn't it, football? Listen, George Graham, when I first came to Arsenal, let's not beat around the bush here. He got the players that he wanted. There was no one else involved. That was it. You know, he might have used David Dean to secure the deal, but George Graham was the one went, I want that player, go and get him. Whereas you might have a little bit of Edu might sort of look at a player and he'll go to Arteta. But I'm pretty much, I'd like to think if Arteta went no, then Edu wouldn't keep pushing for that player to come. I don't know for sure because I haven't got access to it, but I'd like to think that would be the right situation, and they would say, okay, we'll move on to the next target.
One general question from you. From the early 2000s, when we saw the fierce rivalry between United and Astro towards the building of Emirates, and then it became a little bit too toxic. You know, people were questioning Arsene Wenger in 2013-2014, and then you obviously had few personalities that didn't quite fit into Arsenal philosophy, players that dividing opinions like Mesut Ozil before this, and we heard a lot of negative stories about Arsenal, more than the positive one, probably in the past 6-7 years. Do you think finally now Arsenal Football Club is a well-run club?
I think let's look at the first process, if you like, was Arsene Wenger in charge, Highbury, teams he produced up to 06 Champions League final. Absolute, it was, and you know I was there till 2000. Boy oh boy, it was a pleasure to play under Arsene Wenger, and what a group of players he had. After that, it still was, you know, even after I'd gone, you had Henry at his pomp. You know, you had some sensei. You still had Vieira was there, Pires was there.
Cesc Fabregas.
Fabregas. I mean, you look at these players and watch them, and they were just sensational. So it was a great period. And then also, all of a sudden you got the club saying to, if you like, get even better, challenge the elite, if you like. We've got to build a new stadium, which I always think is a big statement. Not building of the new stadium, but to challenge the elite, because I think you're talking about Barcelona and Bayern Munich, probably at the time, in terms of if you're looking at world football. And then, so you build the stadium, and then you realise that actually there's a lot of restrictions on the manager, Arsene Wenger, in terms of what he can do to the team. So I think for me, it was more a case of, look, let's not beat around the bush. We moved to the new stadium. The quality of player that went out and the quality of the player come in were not the same.
Exactly.
And that is, you know, the level of performance of the team to dropped. And that's the most, if you've got a successful team, you keep the support on board. If you haven't got a successful team, the supporters start to question. And then Arsene Wenger came under pressure. I've got to say, in the 2 years before Arsene Wenger left, it was so toxic inside of that stadium. 50% wanted him to stay, 50% didn't. And soon as there was something went wrong within the game, supporters seemed to be arguing amongst themselves. I've never seen anything like it. It was horrible. It wasn't nice to be an Arsenal supporter. And you know, I know Arsene Wenger very well. I played under him. I know what a guy he is. And he has so much pride working for that club. But I have to say, when he left, I felt a little bit relieved, not for him, but also for the club, because I think he was put under such a huge amount of pressure. So I was pleased that, listen, I think Wenger's a great manager, but I was pleased he was left because the atmosphere wasn't great. But I always think that Arsene Wenger believed that he could turn it around, but I just think at that time it probably did need a change. But in saying that, look where we are. But some people still go back and say, yeah, because Arsene Wenger left us in a little bit of a mess. I don't believe that at all, because look at the managers that come in and look at the players that they've tried to bring in to take us back up, just to back up one level. Those players haven't got anywhere near, Wenger's signings. So we need to start lifting the bar, and I think that's what I like about Mikel Arteta. I think we're starting to do that again.
In many ways, Nigel, I agree that the bar is starting to get raised at Arsenal. But specifically in the context of this season, we just spoke about the fact that the last 3 seasons under Mikel Arteta has all been a part of a process to build the club back into a position that they've not been in for a very long time. But specifically in the context of this season, Nigel, what is the bare minimum achievement for Arsenal Football Club?
Ooh, $1 million question.
Yeah.
Not necessarily with all the investment per se, but you take the investment into consideration, you take the processes that have been put in place over the last few years. What is the next step of growth for Arsenal Football Club?
I would have thought that, listen, there would have been a discussion between the owners, Edu, and Arteta. Let me tell you, when I was at that football club, you were expected to win something every single season. Now, that doesn't always happen. But what you can live on and push through is that the period, I've always said from 89 to 2006, well, I left in 2000, so it was an unbelievable period to play for that football club because of the quality of the player coming in, but the trophies that we won. So I'm looking at the team and Arteta now. I would have said that maybe the discussion was that they need to be in the top 4 and they need a long run in one of the cup competitions to go deep into a cup competition. I don't know whether that's Europa League, because that can get you back into Europe, because they tend to mix a little bit with the domestic cup. So I'm thinking top 4 on a long run, maybe into Europa League, if not Europa League, maybe FA Cup. But then you're going to ask me, I know what you're going to ask me, because you're going to put the mic and say, if they don't get there, is he going to get the sack? No.
How do you anticipate that?
No, I don't think. No, I don't think he will. But it's so hard to judge because so far it looks positive. And for me, you've got to judge the season as it goes. Like I always look 10, 20, and then end of season. You've got the start of the season, the middle of the season, where we're going to have the World Cup's going to come into it, and then we're all going to have to start again. So I think what you're going to ask me is, at the end of it, if that doesn't happen, is he going to be getting the sack? And no, I don't think so. So I'll start to ask you the questions now.
You know what, Nigel? I don't think we can ask you that question anymore. It's been a pleasurable conversation.
Pleasure.
You've helped us understand the club a little bit more. It's been great getting insights in terms of the process, in terms of the characters, in terms of the players involved with the club, and obviously also going down the memory lane in terms of getting a glimpse into what it was like back in the good old days for Arsenal Club. And as fans of football, I don't think anyone out there wouldn't want to see Arsenal getting back into a competitive sport.
I can name a couple of clubs.
I mean, as a Man United fan, we enjoyed the rivalry
See
with
how I
Arsenal.
can bring it out already.
We enjoyed the rivalry with Arsenal. It was some of the best football games I ever experienced growing up as a
Quickly,
kid.
just before we finish, let me tell you, why were those games spicy? Because you got the 2 of the biggest teams at the time going head to head, both believed they were better than each other, and both were not going to give way. That's when you talk about rivalry, because if United didn't win the league, Arsenal did, and if Arsenal didn't win the league, usually United win it. 2 amazing teams, and both believe that they could go and knock each other off their perch. That's why it got spicy.
And there you have it, right out of Nigel Winterburn's mouth himself. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Nigel.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you
Cheers.
very
Thank you.